say they're Trump on board.
Aha. We can see the whole room, Firdosapa.
No, we're three of us in 3 rooms. So
Oh, really?
I had to tell the
Same
others
here.
that come on board. So 5 minutes.
Okay, is it Asif? Is Asifa's last name Sultana? I'm sorry, I
Yes.
have COVID brain.
Sultana, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Eileen,
They're both, we're all in our own rooms in the university.
so Eileen, if you see Asifa wanting to enter, do let her in. So
Okay, let
Eileen
me-
is sort of the tech person and she's controlling everything. So she has overall unbelievable
Who is?
powers over everybody. I hope Vicky and
Yeah, they're logging in. I have them on WhatsApp.
right, because then you'll give the running order
Yes.
and then we'll basically tell people that we are asking for questions in chat.
So how does this happen? We just have 10 minutes each,
2 minutes.
2 minutes each
Yeah, it's a pitch.
to pitch. And then the questions.
Yes.
You've already given us a question.
Yeah, so but I'll ask them in public. So I emailed you the question. So then, but I'll read them out again.
Did you email us the questions?
Should I email them to you again now so that you
So this is a new format that DSA is trying out because each session is only 40 minutes. So if one of you will give the 2-minute pitch or summary, because we are assuming that people have looked at the slides and the recording and everything. So it's the 2-minute summary for each paper. So there are 4 papers. And then it's sort of the question that Marioke will ask, and you get about less than 3 minutes to answer them. And then we open to the audience for Q&A.
so I'll put them in the
Chat box.
I'll just send them to you both. Yeah.
So it might be good to know who's doing the 2-minute pitch and who's doing the Q&A from the presenters for your paper. Look at your finger pointing, but we are not there, so we don't know who you're pointing at.
Marioke, the second part of your question is missing for us.
Okay. Yeah, it's oh yeah, it should have just been what does it mean for the agency of young women?
Sohila, will you go through again? I don't know why Anika is not joining, because she's here.
What's her last name?
She needs to be let into the room, I think.
Anika Sabah.
Eileen, if there is an Anika Sabah waiting in the waiting room, can you let
There
her?
was an internet issue.
Okay.
Was there?
Yeah, I didn't have any problem though. Let me check.
Because this one has just told us, Sohila, how the session is going to be conducted.
Yeah, so 2-minute pitch. Maheen is the first, so 2 minutes with the synopsis, the study. Then Asifa and Furnas.
Asifa is the
Asifa
2-minute
is doing
pitch
the
for
2
us.
minutes. Then we go to the Uganda team, who should be online by now, and then I'll read the questions to you, and you can answer. So it looks a bit more like flowing. And we're asking people to put comments in the chat.
It's all about the
Yes.
internet.
Ah,
Eileen, you'll tell us when we are going live, right? I think it's almost time.
Yeah, it's time.
but the
Exactly.
Uganda group aren't here.
They are. I am on WhatsApp with them. They are logging in. They say.
Okay.
Eileen, if you see Victoria or Prosperous trying to join.
Okay, only one person is in the waiting room right now. She's Belen Martinez Caparro.
Yes.
She's a speaker in the next panel, so let her in.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone can come in now, right? Because it's 12
Yeah.
or 11. It is.
Okay.
Should we go ahead? Or wait?
Yeah, I sent one message to the Uganda team, but let's start because the Bangladesh team is the first to present. So thanks, everyone. Nice to see you, Belen and Joylyn. Thanks for joining the first panel session of our panel on gender security. Really nice to have the different speakers interact with each other because there's some similarities for sure. We hope the Uganda team can make it on time because the 4 presentations in this for this session were part of one and the same project that was part of a British Academy funded project on sexual harassment in firms and among domestic workers. Conducted with Brak University and Makerere University in Uganda. So all of them used basically the same design and methodology. So for the sake of efficiency, I can just say that we conducted visual mappings in focus groups with domestic workers and factory workers who worked in agro-processing firms. We did safety audits and body mappings, and then we interviewed 40 workers in each of the countries about their more personal experiences with sexual harassment in the workplace and how they responded to these things. We specifically focus on the role of gender norms in agency and voice and on formality and informality because factories are presumed formal spaces. We'll run this according to the DSA process, so 2 minutes each for each of the papers, and we'll take the order that is online. And after that, we have some questions for the different speakers, and we'll open for discussion. So, well, my name is Marioke Oostrom. I'm a fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, and I'm chairing this together with Sohela Nazneen, my colleague at IDS. All right, Maheen, you have 2 minutes for the synopsis of your paper.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Lopita Haq, who's here, and myself, we were leading this research, the Bangladesh part of the research. Bangladesh is urbanizing rapidly, but we have a very low labor force participation rate for women. And one of the factors we believe is the workplace sexual harassment. So we wanted to know what difference, the differences between women in the informal sector and the formal sector in the urban areas. And we looked at domestic workers and factory workers. And we found that, which is maybe not surprising, but their understanding and their articulation of their experiences of workplace sexual harassment are very much determined by the gender and social norms which make it very difficult for women to speak out and to put into language, which my other colleagues will talk about, their experiences. So it's a matter of shame, it's a matter of honor, and they will not speak out openly unless they're very much forced to. So there are various strategies of trying to avoid sexual harassment and also to protect themselves against sexual harassment. We also found that women's ability to take action in the case when harassment or violence occurs also depends on the type of workplace. We had thought that we, in the formal workplace, would find them using more formal mechanisms, such as complaints committees, going to the police or local representatives. But in fact, there is very little trust and understanding of the formal procedures. Even in the formal workplaces, they're using informal mechanisms. But the difference between domestic workers and firm workers is that because firm workers work in an environment where there are many more women working with them, they have more collective forms of even informal complaints and taking action, whereas domestic workers living in very isolated and working environments are not able to take that kind of action, and the best option is exit or very individualized action by talking to their employers or the families. And so we have a whole range of policy recommendations, but we won't go into that right now.
Thanks, but there are 2 excellent policy briefings available for those interested. Great, thank you, Mahim. Asifa, we turn to you for the second paper, which focuses specifically on language in these case studies.
Okay. Thank you, Mariuke. Urban space has often been identified as a gendered territory. While the urban space offers a freedom from the conventions of the rural life, it also poses new challenges for women. An increased risk of sexual harassment is one of them. As part of listening to the accounts of sexual harassment, we think that a close examination of the language used is very important, because language is a tool that is closely associated with voice and agency. The presence of the suitable language to talk about sexual harassment is a prerequisite to seeking redress. With this view, in this paper, we examine the language used by the low-income young female workers in the urban Dhaka to talk about their experiences of sexual harassment. We also wanted to see whether the various kinds of urban spaces played any roles in shaping their language. Based on the interview data from 20 female factory workers and 20 domestic workers, we found that the expressions of sexual harassment had generic language, and they often lacked the important details of the event. For example, expressions such as accident, bad behavior, and torture were used to talk about the sexual harassment. We also noticed a strong awareness of the social norms in their language. There were frequent mentions of the concepts of honor and shame in their narratives, which seemed to play a key role in determining how they behaved and what they said. We interpreted that using the non-specific language in describing the sexual harassment was a strategy in line with their social norms. A comparison between the expressions used by the two groups, factory workers and the domestic workers, showed that the domestic workers were isolated in their space and also in their language. Their accounts of the sexual harassment were significantly more elaborate, and they contained more graphic language. It seemed that the isolated nature of the domestic space left this group without any network and made them more vulnerable. The factory workers' language, while being generic, had a lot of commonalities. They appeared to have a shared language. The factory workers appeared to have a shared language, which was consistent with the social norms as well as the norms of the workplace. By referring to the alienation of the domestic workspace and the hybrid nature of the factory workspace, we suggest that the researchers as well as the policymakers need to listen closely to the limited expressions that they have and work towards creating a safe space for voicing sexual harassment.
Thank you, Asifa. Yeah, we're wrapping up. I just received a message from Victoria to say that she clicked on the link for the second session. So she will join us in a moment. So while we're waiting for her, shall we just handle the question that we had prepared for the Bangladesh papers, and then we will hopefully by that time Victoria will have logged on. So thanks very much. I think that they're really complementary, the two papers. We had a question for Maheen and Lopita, because we were fascinated by the paradox how so that in urban areas there's more opportunities for women to go to work, and yet they experience sexual harassment at work. And the paradox that it's actually the norms that are considered more restrictive, that for sex segregated workspaces, policing social interactions, and that is what is offering them protection, and in part to protect the reputation of the firms. So what does this mean for the potential of the urban to offer women more choice and freedom? What does this mean for agency? You can. Do you want to come in directly, and then I'll go to Asifa for her question.
Okay. So, and Lopita, add up, please. It is paradoxical, but we found that the women and their families, in fact, were very comfortable if the factories could afford this kind of this kind of segregation and protection, and they felt this is what allowed them, in fact, to work in the factories, especially young women, when their families, the parents and the husbands, also felt that they would be in an environment where they would not have to mix with men, they wouldn't be bumped against and harassed in other ways. But so in terms of what it gave them freedom to take this work, and just if they complained about the harassment they faced, there was a risk that they wouldn't be allowed to go to work. So it's sort of navigating within the different boundaries that gives them a relative measure of freedom, which is perhaps not complete freedom, but then it also gives them the confidence to start to go to work, to start earning an income, and then maybe later changing factories, going to other factories where they get a better income or different working conditions. So it's not an either or, I think. Lopita?
Yeah, so it got me thinking to from a different perspective. People who are the demographic, the population that that looks for factory work or who look for domestic work are desperate for work. So despite sexual harassment, they will, I feel that the demand for employment is much higher. It's a risk that they're willing to take because they need the employment. However, I think that there's some form of mobilization or some form of organization, the employers will be bound. For example, in Dhaka city now, there are lots of cafes, lots of restaurants, and the retail business is really booming, and you see lots of young women coming and working as sales people, and there is a lot of risk for sexual harassment, but it offers such an opportunity that they they will go regardless, or of course they'll leave and go to another shop or to another establishment. But I believe that there is the environment in Bangladesh where if there are policies that are taken by the shop owners, the business owners in the business community, things will change. Things can change to attract a more stable workforce.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And Asifa, question we had for you was to reflect a bit more on this public-private distinction, because the work is public, but domestic work is specifically work in the private realm. So would you and team have further reflections on this?
Yes, I think my team members will respond to the issues raised.
Annika.
Yes. So we've been asked to discuss the fluidity of the public and the private spaces. And I would like to start with the idea of the urban space and the possibilities it opens for women. And now feminist studies of the city have unknowingly given an inaccurate idea of city life being dangerous for women. Instead, the urban life, despite its challenges, is more emancipatory for women as they're freer from the conservative settings and conventional gender roles prevalent in rural areas. Thus, some feminist scholars speak of the androgynous city and emphasize on the inclusive and empowering nature of cities. However, it is not the city itself, but the nature or condition of the space that causes gender-based violence. For example, the same street or park in broad daylight, which is safer for a woman, can be dangerous at night. Now, about the public and the private spaces, feminist researchers think that the prevailing concepts of these as separate are fictional and false because men and women, or all of us, we cross and negotiate between public and private spaces in our daily lives. For example, exclusivity in many workspaces create private spaces, while on the other hand, there is paid work in many domestic spaces. And the
must have been a network issue. I think she must have frozen for everyone, not just for me. I see people nodding. Yeah. Okay. I'm very sorry. But for the interest of time, I think it's best to then move on because we don't know how long this will take. Victoria, I'm very happy you managed to the login and welcome. And would you like to speak to your case study in Uganda? You have the 2 minutes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, thank you. So the case study I wrote about is about domestic workers who are in Uganda. And largely these are young women, less educated, from low income settings, and they live with their employers. So it's basically, and they live like a family setting with them. So they have limited movement and also limited freedom of association. And so they encounter sexual violence in very unique ways because at times their bosses, they would be protectors, are the ones actually that inflict the violence on these young women. So they are limited when it comes to reporting, and also the social norms that they relate with limit how much they can say out in public because sexuality and sexual relations are looked at as secret, but also sacred. So it's like you're not supposed to just say anything anyhow, so they can't report as much as they would have managed. Then they lack the language also, how to say what is really happening to them. It's culturally and socially expected that some words can't just be said. So some words are considered vulgar and obscene. And also if you're speaking to an elderly person, it means you can't say some things when you're speaking to someone older than you, more so from a different, if they're males and you're female, you're limited on how much interaction you can have with the reporting, the structures and the systems. So overall, that's the kind of discussion we had, reporting on the social culture norms that are limiting formal reporting and voicing of young women in Uganda. So we looked at women, young girls, young women who are in the urban setting.
I've explained that, thanks, Vicky.
Yeah,
I explained the design. Thanks for speaking to some of the key findings. I noticed that Prosperous is not in the call. So would you mind, I know you didn't prepare 2 minutes on the factory workers in Kampala, but you've interviewed all of them. So would you mind reflecting a few of the key findings about the factory workers and what was different? Because this is a formal setting, it's group work, but still there's also sexual harassment in the factories. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So among the farm workers, so it was the same kind of population, young ladies 18 to 24, and these ones are working processing farms. So they're expected to be formal, but actually what happens in the farms is kind of informal in a way it goes on. So firms are expected to have, for instance, an anti-sexual harassment policy for every firm that employs over 25 employees. But what will happen is that many of them don't have it, and they don't prioritize even the reporting that relates to sexual work and sexual harassment rather. And so these young women also almost had similar things they couldn't report. Language was also a problem, and the social norms still were at play, affecting what they can say, how much they can say, and also the structure on how you report. So the firms were different in a way that, they get it was clear, the disaggregation between the employers and the managers and the supervisors. There was a higher power dynamics. Yeah, starting right from the gate when they come in with their applications for a job, even the gate man, he had a power, rage, he had a way of harassing these girls. So they explained that, there isn't really much of a system that caters for sexual harassment within the workplace. And many of them had suffered the explanations of how they lost the under fear, always losing the job, you're on tension, you can't report, the person you're reporting to is the one who is harassing. So it was the play out is really dynamic and unique in each of the settings. But the clear thing is that both girls in the domestic space and the firms were experiencing a workplace sexual harassment.
Yeah, thank you. With the domestic workers, because of their isolated conditions, more vulnerable to the very severe forms, even rape we encountered and exploitation. Thanks very much for also picking on the factory case study, Victoria. We had also a question prepared for you, because we'd love to hear a bit more about the domestic workers. What actually happens when they do speak about incidents of harassment? What then happens, and how gender norms also are reproduced in this encounter? Because gender norms, they clearly limited their voice and how they express, but the party they're speaking to is also influenced by these gender norms. Could you explain a bit more what you saw happen in that encounter and the different actors they have spoken to?
Okay, so much of the reporting was happening in the informal setting. Reporting through the formal structures was really limited, and it rarely happened. And this was due to a number of reasons. First of all, the formal institutions where they could report were distantly located. And these young women were not really having that much trust in, for instance, the police. They would explain that when you go to police, you have to encounter another male. In most cases, they were male. You're speaking to another male, explaining things that have happened. The space is not, private. They would explain how you're in a single room, explaining different cases. One person's reporting land violence, others reporting, laundry and what. And for you, talking about a sensitive issue of sexual harassment. So reporting in the formal structures was really limited, and it was also dragged by the fact that they had to pay for the files and the stamps and all these simple things that the papers actually, you pay for the paper, for instance. So many of these young women were reporting to the informal structures. They reported, for instance, to the church leaders. And it was interesting how the church leaders were emphasizing forgiveness over seeking justice. The Bible tells you to forgive, you're supposed to forgive and have peace with yourself and also your neighbor. So many of them were not taking the justice avenue in search for the peace and the forgiveness part of it. Then they were also talking to elderly members in the community, especially the women who are elderly. And these women, as much as they were willing to listen and they trusted them and believed them, they were emphasizing kind of the social norms that are expected, be quiet about it, don't spoil people's marriages. If you mention, then the wife will leave and you'll be responsible for having broken a particular marriage. Yet marriage is looked at as something very important. And if you fail in marriage, then you failed in life. So they're trying to emphasize the social understanding and social norms that really inform how society operates.
Yeah.
But there were also issues that they reported to the local councils. And in this local council, there was a particular woman councillor that they reported to. She seemed to be helpful. should advise them to report to police and also follow up with the perpetrators of these forms of violence. But she's not legally, binding. So it is really more one-on-one and the informal operations. So it's like much of the reporting happened in the informal structures and not in the formal. So what happened is that when they reported at times, they would be disappointed. There's a case of a local chairperson, a local chairman whom they reported to, and he kept asking the victim, what did he take from you? You can be quiet, you can handle that. These things always happen. The kind of discouragement instead of giving the support that the victims would have expected. So the reactions and responses to reporting varied depending on who was being reported to in the particular instances.
Thanks, Vicky, which only goes to show that, it's not the responsibility only of the women to become more self-confident to challenge this. The action needs to happen on all these other actors and institutions in society as well. I think there's still a lot of focus on let's support the voice of the women, but if we see what they're up against, there's other strategies needed as well. Okay, I'd like to open up the floor to see if other people also have questions. I see Belen and Joy have joined us who are speaking in our second session. I wonder if you have questions for the speakers. I think feel free to open your mic because we're not with many people. So if you do have a question, please let us know. And otherwise, I do still have another one, and Suhela might have other questions as well. Anyone with Asifa? No, Fergus is behind Asifa now. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to add my 2 bit to the private public question, but if there are other questions, let's wait for that.
I don't think so, so go ahead.
You had other questions, so
no, I've spoken already, so we'd love to hear from you.
No, so I'm sorry that the internet connection on our floor has completely gone, and we're in a hotspot thing that Asifa has set up for us. But anyway, on the private public question that Marioke had posted earlier, it really interested me because, and I would like to take a long historical view of it if I'm allowed to. For us, it goes back to the anti-colonial struggles of the early 20th century, when we were struggling with the place of women in the nation and what constituted modernity for the woman. And in this, Partha Chatterjee has the classic essay about it, but he makes this what we call in Bangla the Ghar Bahir divide, and in this Ghar, the inner outer divide. And within this, the woman was placed in a very anomalous situation, so that she became, in Partha Chatterjee's words, the new woman for the new patriarchy. But with the creation of Bangladesh in the latter part of the 20th century, development and women's empowerment became key words, women in development and women's empowerment. And by empowerment, it was mainly meant women's economic empowerment. And as more women went out into the workplace, as we saw, became this gendered space, and the usual things about demand for childcare, maternity leave, etc. This is an international, worldwide thing that's kept happening. But at the same time, when we look at the workspaces that we've looked at, the factory and the domestic workspace, the factory is amazing because it in order to protect women, it reestablishes some of the paternalistic things that we associate with the family and with the private. It is echoed in the factory. And of course, the domestic space is absolutely murky because it's somebody's place of work and somebody else's most intimate space. So the blurring between the public and the private was very interesting, but as all of us have commented, how women negotiate these blurred spaces, these murky spaces, is interesting as well. So we saw in our research the women's ability to and strategy to negotiate these spaces through women's friendships, which of course is more available in the factory arena, and the isolated domestic worker, and the contrast that has been drawn by all speakers on that. But what struck me in the Bangladeshi thing was the intergenerational communication, that you spoke to people outside, older women who may be able to give you some advice. And the other was also the interclass communication. We found in the case of domestic workers, the young woman approaching the mistress of the household with her complaints, and in the hope and expectation that she would be protected by the older woman. So these are things that we need to look at further, I feel, because they open up new arenas of communication, the usual. And within all of this, we have found the complete ineffectiveness of the formal structures. And if the formal structures are to be made more effective, I think is that we should explore really these women to women communications, the linguistic aspects and all that. That's just what I wanted to say about the public.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Fergus. Thanks so much. Because yeah, I think this is great to have a bit further depth, really, really nicely addressed. Thank you. Okay, do others have maybe further reflections on this public-private? I really liked the element of intergeneration, interclass, because that's something we have not yet addressed very much in our report, and something we can now dive into when we do our other articles. So that'd be really nice to explore. I'm looking around at the screen, but I don't see people raising hands. Yes, Arunima, please.
Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm Arunima, and I'm joining here from Sydney, Australia. And my research is basically interlinks with so many things that have been discussed so far. So I'm very much like, I don't have a question, just a bit of comment. So in my research, basically what I looked into is for my PhD research, which I submitted, but still waiting for comments. So what I tried to explore is the diverse dimensions of women's experiences of sexual harassment on public transport in Dhaka city of Bangladesh. So, and for the purpose, I actually tried to explore how class, age, and religion interconnect with one another to create women's specific narratives of sexual harassment. So, of course, for the purpose of this research, I interviewed some domestic workers as members of working class community. And this debate of public-private dichotomy that actually came a lot in my thesis discussion. I'm now going to go in very depth about that. But what I explored is like most of the working class domestic worker women explained to me they were very much into that victim blaming era, and they were thinking like if women goes outside and works in outside spaces, they are bound to like go bad in their terminology, and so they will be like it is justifiable for men to harass them. And then again, they believed because they are also engaged in income generating activities, but they are doing it in the private domain. So their respectability is like intact. So one of the key things I explored is like how women narrate about sexual harassment is basically a lot related to women's ideas of ideal womanhood or respectability. And that again emerged from Partho Chatterjee's work of new womanhood. And so like, so again, because there were like these domestic workers I interviewed, because they're working in the private space, they feel like they are in that respectability genre. They are not basically harming their respectable identity of going outside and acting like bad women who should be more prone to sexual harassment.
Oh, thank you, Arunima. We hope to hear more about it in the next session. We'll be discussing your paper, so it's great to start bridging it to the next session. Well done. Any quick response from the Bangladesh team to Arunima's comment? Otherwise, I would like to go back to Vicky. Any quick response? Because I think that there was also a notion of the ideal woman in the Ugandan studies. So Arunima talks about the ideal woman, which I think is an interesting concept because it also brings in norms. So Vicky, do you think you can, are you able to link this back to your case studies?
Yeah, I'll try. I'll try. So the concept of the ideal woman in Uganda, first of all, one thing that an ideal woman is expected to have, or maybe to be, is to be married. You cannot be ideal unless you're a married woman. Then in that marriage, you're also expected to have children. And so you're expected actually to maintain the marriage. So in linking back to how social norms played out within the domestic, the sexual violence against domestic workers, many girls would accommodate, this kind of harassment in anticipation. At times they would be harassed and they keep, maybe expecting this is the right person, because parents and relatives generally put pressure on young women to get married. When are getting married? It becomes this constant bother that one has to deal with. So they would at times accommodate and actually even expect the harassment in anticipation for the good partners, the marriage partners that one might be looking out for. So there were cases where girls would say, actually, I enjoyed when they touched my bums, because, they were appreciating my body, meaning I'm marriage material, taking on, instead of realizing that you're actually being harassed, they look at it in the positive direction. If you're appreciated and you're well shaped, you have, this came out very clearly in the body maps. They were showing which parts are appreciated and how they're happy when men compliment these, kind of structures. So it is really, the ideal woman has to be well structured, married, and, submissive. You have to keep the secrets of the family, don't just speak out anyhow. So even if you're being harassed, you're expected to, have a limit as to how much you can say and to who you can say it. So you can't just move out to go reporting to the police, for instance. The family secrets have to stay within that domestic space and they never cross out into the public. Yeah, so if someone falls short of all these expectations, it means you're failing. You're not a woman, you're not a real woman in that case. Yeah.
Yeah, which is another paradoxical thing, right? About the good one, you're not supposed to attract this kind of attention, but then you're expected to in preparation for adult life. It's something I find very difficult to get my head around about how this has worked. We're nearing the end time of our session, so just looking at Sahela, if you want to do like a reflection at the end. And I would love everyone to encourage to continue the discussion at our next session. We have a half an hour break and then go to the next one. So Hella.
Just quickly for the next session, because I think that's at 11:50. It starts. So could the speakers join a bit early, because we just want to make sure your mic and everything is working. So that's one. In terms of just quick reflections, I mean, of course, what becomes obvious is all the different types of paradoxes that we are in. So while we talk about women's empowerment and breaking the restrictive norms around agency and sort of the issues about how paid work can empower you, and then obviously paid work is taking you to spaces that are not necessarily empowering in and of itself. And on top of that, then you find in terms of having agency, which is very constrained agency, is that you kind of have to make yourself fit within the restrictive norms and behave in a particular way, right? So that you don't experience sort of the kind of vulnerabilities that you're exposed to. So what does it mean? I mean, for me as somebody who works in development, a lot of it is about what can you do? Okay, here's this problem. How do you address it? Now, this problem kind of seems quiet. It's multi-layered and you have to address it at multiple levels with multiple actors, right? So while we focus on, okay, let's get women sort of in a way to be able to raise their voice, etc. What we saw with Me Too and everything. Okay, you raised your voice, but then what changes? If you have to change social norms, if it is about, then you have to come out as sort of a collective group, which in domestic worker setting is very difficult because the type of work itself is isolating, and it's in a private space. There are issues around, okay, you set up formal mechanisms, so we know in the factories, okay, you might have policies around sexual harassment, but then who do you go to? How much do you expose when it's a co-worker or it's your boss? You know, what are the risks there? So it's not just about setting up these policies or committees, it's about the processes. And then there's the formal process, which we heard from Vicky, but also it's in the Bangladesh papers that you don't trust the police. You don't trust the mechanisms that are there, because a lot of the solutions are legal solutions, but it's not, because it's about, if workplace harassment is limiting you in certain ways, it's about discrimination that a particular group of people face, whether that's women, or currently, if you're looking at the UK and what's happening in the UK Parliament, the queer group is facing a lot of harassment from senior white male MPs. So what does that mean? You know, but then it's not always a legal solution, you know, and that makes it so difficult in terms of how you come up with the steps, but you have to start somewhere, and law is the first place to start with which then you go and you sort of try to hold other actors accountable, but you can only do it collectively together with others. And then it's about then how do we come together collectively.
Thanks so much. Great reflections, linking also to how we should start, where and how should we start thinking about what to do. So yes, we did have also the policy briefings online for this project for those interested. Let's close, because we have to jump on to the next call in a matter of minutes. Thanks so much to the team for giving us another push. You know, there's so much more we can dive into in terms of other concepts, other aspects of it. So we're not yet done with the project, dear friends. We'll see you in a couple of minutes in the next session. Looking forward to the other papers. Yeah, the 47B link.
See you. All right, see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.